May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Last Sunday, we began our 4-week season of creation. And we started with a celebration of the earth. If you look at the front of your bulletin this week, it's Humanity Sunday. And I was struck with the fact that so often our liturgy meets us right where we need to be in our lives. Because the actions around the world this week have certainly showed us some of the best of humanity and some of the worst of humanity. They've showed us ways that we are interconnected, ways that one person's actions can influence the actions and reactions of many. The way that a decision made here changes the lives of many over here. And we all know this. And we know it to be true. And we know that it has always been true. We hear it again in our gospel lesson this morning. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, some of Jesus' earliest disciples, 2 of the 4 that he called first, left their father with the boat and went to follow Jesus. You would have imagined that those men who were privileged to have been called first might have learned something in the time that they had been wandering with Jesus. But instead, what do we get this morning? We get a couple of little boys playing King of the Mountain and trying to get one up on everybody else. We hear them come to Jesus saying, Jesus, when you come into your glory, we want to sit one at your right and one at your left. They wanted to make sure they weren't going to miss anything. They wanted to be sure they got the best. They wanted to make sure that they were going to be recognized for the great men that they were, their faithfulness at following Jesus, some of his earliest disciples. But what were they really concerned about? Me. I want what I want. As long as I get what I want, it's all good. I'm the most important one. I need to take care of myself. Doesn't matter what happens to the rest of those folks. If they just weren't smart enough to pick it up, to know that they needed to get there ahead of the rest, well, that's their problem. As long as I get the glory I deserve, the rest is good. The interesting thing about the other 10 is they're angry because they didn't think of it first. They're like, well, I should have asked first, then I would be in Jesus' glory. They're angry that they didn't get there. But in thinking about it's all about me, James and John being concerned about themselves, they didn't care about the rest of the 10. They didn't care about what they had been through together. They didn't care about what might happen. They cared about me. I was listening to the radio this week after the murder of our ambassador, and somebody was commenting on the fact that unfortunately we're living in a time in the world, especially in our country and in Western Europe, where the greatest good, the highest value is me. As long as I get what I want, what I need, as long as I'm taken care of, as long as I'm on top and I'm first, that is most important. And that idea plays out over and over and over and over again. And somebody called in and said, well, what if our greatest good, what if our number one value was the respect of others, the care of others? What if that was our number one goal and our greatest good? Instead of this inward-looking focus that we seem to be in the midst of, to have an outward-looking focus on what do my neighbors need. And not just our neighbors in our cities, in our schools, in our churches. What do our neighbors across the ocean need? What do our neighbors, people that we don't even know, need from us? It's a good question for us to ponder as we saw the violence build and build and build this week. What do our brothers and sisters need from us? Because clearly they weren't getting something. I was fortunate this week to come across the story of a woman. Her name was Edith Cavell. Anybody ever hear of her? Have you? A nurse in the First World War. She was a British nurse and a patriot in the First World War who found herself caught in German-occupied Belgium and pressed into service. And Edith Cavell nursed any soldier who came to her hospital. American, English, French, German, Italian, it didn't matter to her. If there was a soldier who was ill or wounded, she nursed that soldier. Now, Edith Cavell was also a patriot. And in the midst of her nursing, she helped more than 200 Allied soldiers escape German-occupied territory, get across the border where they would be safe. And for all of her work and for all of her trouble, Edith Cavell was caught by the Germans, tried and sentenced for treason, and was sentenced to be executed by a German firing squad. And the night before her execution, she said, "I realize that patriotism is not enough. I must not harbor bitterness or hatred towards anyone." And the next morning she was killed for her actions in helping supposed enemy soldiers escape during World War I. I must not harbor bitterness or hatred towards anyone. This is a part of our spiritual life and our spiritual journey, our moving outward from ourselves. And we have good examples for this. It's in our own baptismal covenant. I promise to strive for justice and peace and respect the dignity of every human being. If that was our greatest good, what would the possibilities be? What would the world look like if everybody held that as their number one value, as their greatest good? This has been a hard week. I've been struck by the violence that has spread and spread. I've also been struck by the photos of people in Libya holding up signs that said, "Not all Muslims are like this. This is not the actions of all of our people." I think it's important for us to remember that we are all connected. The actions of one impact the lives of many. I'll leave one story with you this morning. It's a story about the prophet Muhammad. Muhammad opened his door one day and found garbage strewn on his doorstep, and he cleaned it up. Every day, the prophet Muhammad opened his door and found garbage strewn on his doorstep, and every day he cleaned it up. This went by for weeks and weeks and weeks. And finally one day he opened his door and there was no garbage on his doorstep. And the prophet went to the woman to see what was wrong with her. if all of our hearts were open in such a way, what power and goodness would there be in the world? Amen.